Welcome to Including You, a podcast by Disability Rights Arkansas. On this podcast, we shine a light on the real, everyday experiences of people with disabilities, the challenges, triumphs, and all the moments in between. At Disability Rights Arkansas, we're committed to providing guidance to people with disabilities on navigating their rights, tackling everyday issues, and accessing the support they need in a complex world. In this podcast, Including You, we bring that information directly to you, the listener. We'll cover topics like accessibility questions, building your career, securing the care you deserve, and even navigating the nuances of love and relationships as a person with a disability. Because everyone has the right to know their rights. Everyone, including you. So whether you're a seasoned advocate or someone just starting to think differently about disability, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Amber Quaid, and together we'll explore how small, meaningful changes can make a big difference. Let's dive in. Our guest joining us today is Kyla Bishop, staff attorney with Disability Rights Arkansas. She's going to talk to us a little bit about IEP. But before we get started, Kyla, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Amber. So my name is Kyla Bishop. I'm one of the staff attorneys here at Disability Rights Arkansas. I focus primarily on education. I've been doing this for about 5 years now, and it's been a learning experience. But thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk about IEPs today.
We're always excited to have someone with several years of knowledge and just sharing that wealth with us. Well, we're excited to get to talk with Kyla today, but before we do, I just want to let you know I'm not alone in hosting today's podcast. We also have Jamie with us. Jamie, you want to say hi?
Hey guys, it's Jamie Gardner, the marketing coordinator here at DRA.
Today we're going to dive into this whole IEP conversation. So
let's go.
Let's go. All right. So say I want an IEP or a special education related services, but I have no clue where to start. What do I do?
So the first thing that we should cover before getting into IEPs is, what is the law governing IEPs, right? So that law would be the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so that law requires that each eligible child with a disability should receive a free, appropriate public education. And so that's where, that special education and IEPs come in. So, what is special education? A lot of the times when I get new parents or I'm talking, with people out in the community, they don't really know, what that is. And so, special education literally just means specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. So, alterations in how they deliver instruction, how they set up assignments, even what they're working on. It's all, it's just specially designed instruction to meet the needs of that child. And so related services are any of those services that are needed to achieve that requirement, that specially designed instruction. And so those can look like speech language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, because, we're thinking, even if the child needs assistance with, writing and reading, they need to know how to, or they need to be able to hold a pencil, so to say. And so that's where something like occupational therapy would step in and help out, with those skills. And so taken together, it's just that, like I say, that specially designed instruction to meet those needs of the child. And so a lot of times parents aren't introduced to the concept of special education or an IEP on their own. A lot of the times parents are introduced to IEPs through the receipt of, early childhood services, or if there is a recommendation from a doctor or other, medical professional. So say the child has been newly diagnosed in that diagnosis or evaluation, what have you, there may be a recommendation for, an IEP that, requires that specialized instruction. Also, a teacher or other school professional can recommend an IEP as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be a professional from outside of the school. And so those are the most common situations we've had of parents, being introduced to that process.
Which makes complete sense. I know that we had talked a little bit before about IEP. So sometimes I know people misunderstand what an IEP is, but it's actually a document, isn't it?
Correct. So it is a legal document that basically sets out, that outlines what that specially designed instruction is going to look like. Now, what do I mean when I say it's a legal document? I mean that the school district is legally obligated to provide those services within the IEP at no cost to the parent. So it is an actual document. IEP, it stands for Individualized Education Plan. And so, that's what it is. It is a document. It's a plan that outlines, like I said, that specially designed instruction, however they need it. And so parents should be given copies of the IEP. I always recommend bringing a copy of one to the meeting. And if they don't have that, they should and can request that from the school district.
So, I didn't know that it was actually a document, so that's kind of cool. So I guess the basic idea of what an IEP is, but the whole thing is still kind of confusing, and I'm sure pretty confusing to a lot of parents and family members, out there. So if I, just have these documents, do I just turn them into the school, or is there a type of specific referral process, or what's the best way to go about that?
Right. So, yeah, an IEP just doesn't materialize out of air, right? This, it all we have to get the ball rolling somehow. And so, there is an actual referral process, a legal process to obtain an IEP. And, anyone with relevant information on the child, whether that be the parent, a teacher, principal, they can make a referral for the child to receive special education services. And so, that referral should go to the special education director of the school or, your principal, but someone at admin level. And I would recommend that they send that in writing just so that you have a copy of it. You can see who you sent it to and exactly when. And so once you submit that referral to the appropriate person, the school district has 7 days to schedule a conference. And so this is where things kind of get to moving quickly. And at that referral conference, that is where the school district has to obtain a parent's consent to evaluate the child. That's a really important thing. They have to have your permission before they proceed with this process. So, we have to get all our signatures and, everything like that. But, once the parent has given that consent for testing, the district has 60 days to complete that evaluation, 60 days. And then within the 30 days after the last part's completed, they have to schedule a conference to basically review that evaluation and, look over the results to determine if the child needs special education services. So, yeah, it's kind of, it goes quickly, but, that's to ensure that there is no delay. Obviously we're talking about education. So, any delay could be, a serious lack in progress. So, it's designed, to move quickly. And so, if you have any evaluations that, could help the school district in their determination, very much encourage parents to give those over at the referral conference.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot to this process, but what happens with the initial evaluation and assessment? Is there anything I should worry about?
So the main thing to know about an initial evaluation is that it's going to be comprehensive. We're going to be assessing all areas of suspected disability so that we don't miss anything. And so an evaluation, they call it a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation. And that is, performed by a licensed medical professional. And they're going to administer various assessments, such as achievement testing, which assesses a student's ability in academic areas such as like math, reading, written language, things like that. They're also going to be testing for cognitive and intelligence testing. We're going to have behavioral testing and then adaptive testing, which includes skills such as communication, daily living skills, socialization, motor skills, things like that. So not only are we testing to see what the child's academic needs are, but we're also going to be looking at those functional skills as well. And, if the parent or the school district have, a suspicion that a child needs it, they can also administer assessments for therapies such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, any of those therapies that are needed for the child to receive a benefit from, their education, that specially designed instruction. And so again, it's meant to be comprehensive. They're meant to do, I think, the more comprehensive, the better. Again, we want an entire picture of the child so we're not missing anything. And so we're designing an IEP that they can actually benefit from.
So let's say like all of this, goes well, goes super great. Does that mean that we're like good to go? Does anything else need to happen? Do we need to do this again at the start of like the next school year? Like, what does that look like?
Right. So basically at the end of the referral process, we're going to have this meeting. It's an evaluation conference to, review the results, right? And so the IEP team, which is going to consist of a group of district staff and the parent, this team is going to ask 2 questions. First, we're going to ask, does the child have a disability? Because, in order to receive an IEP, you have to have a disability. So that would be the first question. And then the second question is, does this child need specially designed instruction? Because not every child with a disability is going to need an IEP. You can't get an IEP just by virtue of the fact you have a disability. It's, do you have a disability and need that specially designed instruction? And so a lot of parents, they ask, what does that look like? Well, it's different for each child. There's no like one specific set of criteria such as like, oh, you have to score this, or, it's not. It's very individualized. It's going to be, different for each one. But, what they will do at that meeting is they're going to review the evaluation, any input or evaluation documentation given by the parent. They're going to get input, from the teacher. And so it's going to be a thorough discussion. But at that point, if they do decide that, the child needs that, then, we actually move into forming and creating the actual IEP document.
Well, I was just wondering, does my kid need to be a part of this meeting?
They are not required to attend IEP meetings. When they're younger, they may not necessarily need to attend these meetings. They're kind of obviously, higher level, kind of dealing with things a little more advanced than, like what a second grader can understand. And so it's up to the parent, it's up to the team. But if we have an older student, like maybe say someone in middle school or high school, at that point, it may be more beneficial to invite them to, the IEP meetings.
My kid doesn't need to attend the meetings, but should I bring anyone else to these meetings, especially if my kid's younger, but just the initial start of IEP meetings? Should I be bringing anyone else to these meetings?
Yeah, so the parent can bring any individual that's knowledgeable about the child's disability with them to the IEP meeting. So in practice, that looks like, a mental health therapist, maybe the child's BCBA, the Board Certified Behavioral Analyst, or the RBT, Registered Behavior Technician, or a PASS coordinator even. Anyone who might have knowledge about the child's disability, the parent can bring with them. They don't have to receive permission from the school district to do that. That is their right.
Based on these results, that this team, finds and whatever they, end up deciding, the child would be, I guess, officially enrolled or have an IEP?
Yeah. So once we reach, that decision that the child needs that special instruction, the entire team is going to sit down. Will be at the same meeting. They're going to sit down and actually, make the IEP. Each IEP has to have a set of goals, and those goals have to be designed to meet the child's educational needs. And those educational needs are going to be those that were defined or revealed as part of the evaluation process. And so these goals have to be designed to meet the child's educational needs. And an important thing for parents to remember is that includes academic and functional goals. So behavioral skills, adaptive living skills, etc. Anything that, the child or the team determines the child needs to, receive that instruction. So they're actually going to sit down after, at the same meeting where they determine from the evaluations that they need the instruction, they need an IEP. They're going to, make the document and establish these goals. And so then those goals are, implemented in the classroom. That's what they work on. For example, I've seen some like math IEP goals that say, the student will work on, multiples of 3 or, something like that. And that will be, measured every 9 weeks typically. And that's how they keep track of the progress.
What if I'm noticing that my child is struggling? Can I just go ahead and set up an IEP meeting to have a conversation?
Oh, yeah. So a parent can request an IEP meeting at any time. Often we have parents that come to us saying, the school told me I only get 3 IEP meetings a year. No, the parent can request a meeting at any time. I always say this, put your request in writing so you know who you sent it to and exactly when you sent it. But the parent can request a meeting, verbally if they want to. There is a 14-day notice requirement. We can't just have an IEP meeting tomorrow if we want one. There's a 14-day notice requirement. That's just to allow everyone time to be able to be there and stuff. But the parent can waive that if they want to. If there's a need to have an IEP meeting sooner than that, that's totally up to the parent. There's also, at IEP meetings, all required team members have to be there too. And so we've kind of been talking about it throughout this conversation, but specifically the IEP team is made up of the parent, a regular education teacher, a special education teacher, a representative from the school district who is, knowledgeable about services and the special education provided by the district, and then someone who can interpret the evaluation results. And, sometimes one staff member can fill more than one role. So if you don't have, exactly 5 people at every meeting, just ask the scheduler, who's serving what role. And then also, just as a parent can invite individuals to IEP meetings, the school district can do that as well. They can choose, to invite, like a dean of student services or, dean of academic services or, the principal of the alternative learning environment. Just as the parent has that right, the school district has that as well. So that's just some things to remember when calling IEP meetings.
So what happens if my child turns 18 during the school year? Does that mean my rights as a parent or a guardian get transferred to my child? Do they go completely away? What does that look like?
Oh, yes. At the age of 18, the rights of the parent under the IDEA transfer over to the student. Yes, in short, it does go away, but a lot of the times parents still stay involved. And a lot of the times the students want that. So just because, those rights transfer, it doesn't mean, parents are going to be completely cut out and barred from being involved. That's not typically the case.
And then what about, whenever they turn 16, because you had mentioned that earlier.
Right. And so when they turn 16, that's when the school or the IEP team have to start implementing transition services. Okay, so what are transition services? They are specifically their coordinated set of activities that facilitate the child's transition from school to whatever post-school activities they're interested in doing, college or university or vocational education, integrated employment, independent living, anything like that. A coordinated set of activities to prepare them from that move from school to whatever comes next. And so as they are, well, first, what are those activities? That can include instruction, certain areas. It can include the receipt of any related services like the ones we've talked about before. It can be community experiences. I've seen students shadowing a business owner if they're interested in opening or doing any sort of business things. And then that also includes the acquisition of any functional living skills. So if the child is going to be with supported or, independent living, learning how to, live by themselves, maintain a home, upkeep themselves, and et cetera. But whatever it is, we have to take into account the child's needs and interests. We don't get to pick for them. They get to pick. And, I encourage, IEP teams and parents to, talk about this with their kids, before 16. I mean, you can start having these conversations with the IEP team as early as 14. But, it's definitely something we want them to be thinking about. And for example, if the end goal of one student is to become a social worker, then, we would have goals and transition services geared towards going to college, learning to live alone, learning if they struggle with this, learning like timeliness or, anything like that. It's those activities that are going to set the child up for success.
All of the parts you're talking about is while the child is still in high school, but what happens when they graduate? Does this whole IEP team become no longer necessary? If so, then what happens to my child's services? What if they don't graduate when they're 18? Can they age out of services? How does all that part work?
Yes, a child can age out of services. So no matter what, under Arkansas law, once the child reaches the age of 21, the school district is no longer obligated to provide special education services. And then, in the second instance, the school is no longer obligated to provide services if the child receives a regular education diploma. Students on IEPs can achieve regular diplomas if they complete their graduation requirements set by the state. That's a common misconception is from parents, is my child going to be able to walk? And yes, that is available for them. Another thing, and this is unique for Arkansas, we also have the Arkansas alternate pathway to graduation for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And so, the graduation requirements for that look a lot similar to the regular diploma requirements, but just amended as appropriate. And then, students, they can also earn a GED, though that doesn't necessarily mean a school district can stop special education services. So, in the two instances where a school district can absolutely stop is when the student ages out or they graduate with a regular diploma.
Okay. I was like, I feel like this has been some excellent information. How about you, Jamie?
Oh, yeah, no, I've definitely learned some stuff for sure that I didn't know beforehand.
Right. I've been taking notes this whole time.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Well, thank you, Kyla, for being on the show here with us today and sharing all this information. Before we go, is there anything that you feel that people should take away or something we missed or just any last notes you have for us?
I'll just say, stay vigilant. A lot of this, it is a lot to absorb. If your child is very young, you're probably going to be dealing with IEPs for a while. So, do your research, review your IEPs and just stay on top of it. And, that's going to be the best way to get through this process. You're not alone. If you have any, parent groups in your area, definitely reach out to them. And if you have any questions or any concerns, please reach out to us.
That was wonderful. That was perfect. Thank you so much, Kyla, for being on the show today.
No problem.
Thank you for joining us on Including You. We hope today's conversation has sparked ideas, offered guidance, or inspired you to take action in your own life and community. At Disability Rights, we believe advocacy isn't always about sweeping reforms. It's about the small, everyday actions, like asking the right questions, standing up when something feels wrong, or helping to create a space where everyone feels included. If today's episode resonated with you, visit us at disabilityrightsar.org to learn more about your rights, access resources, and find ways to get involved. But don't forget to follow us on social media for updates, tips, and stories from the disability community. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, leave us a review, or start a conversation, because that's where change begins. Remember, everyone deserves to know their rights. Everyone, including you. Until next time, I'm Amber Quaid, and we'll talk with you again soon.